Welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I am Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong, and today I'm really lucky to be here with Justin Otley, who's the VP of Global Sales Development with Talkdesk. And if you're not familiar with Talkdesk, they help organizations deliver customer service that drives growth and improves the bottom line. Justin, welcome to the show.
Brian, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we started chatting about something that I feel like lately I've been hearing more about. People are frustrated with the AE-SDR process and kind of the handoff and how the organizations work together. So I thought it would be cool to talk about that today. So before we start with what good looks like, what are the mistakes you see people making with that handoff today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it starts with not enough of it is documented, defined, and enabled. So the process of how it should work, of what the AE should come prepared with, of what the SDR should come prepared with, right? Like for the daily, weekly meetings, how the handoff process works, like from a meeting to an opportunity. Not enough of that is documented. So I think that's the biggest mistake, right? One of the next ones I see, we recently, one of my SDR managers and I, Parker, he had actually put together what he calls the 3 styles of how an AE works with an SDR. So there's the hands-off approach, there's the supervisor approach, and there's the team approach. So the hands-off approach is essentially what it sounds like, right? There's basically zero guidance, no context, just bring me meetings, go wild in my accounts. Here are the do not touch accounts, right? Go get me with the CIO, all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, got it. Then there's the supervisor approach. And that is one of the quickest ways to, one, burn out your SDR, and 2, ensure that meetings are not coming to you and they're going to your peers, right? And that's essentially what it sounds like the supervisor approach is, a little micromanaging and almost managing the relationship like a boss and not a true partnership with the SDR. And then there's the team, right? And we can go into that later, but that's truly defining what good looks like, what each party should come prepared with, what are those expectations for each other, how we do this thing the right way.
Got it. So yeah, so the first 2 were sort of like not ideal, and the team is ideal. And so how do you map that out? Because I'm thinking through as you're talking about it that if you're mapping out what's happening, you're not mapping out best practice. How do you figure out what best practice is?
I think it starts with greatness diagnosis,
Yeah.
right? Like we've heard of issue diagnosis. This is greatness diagnosis. So you need to go study and interview your best SDR AE pairings. So you have to define who these pairings are across the org. And the beauty of it is once you start to get these different pairings, you'll realize, they have different sets of strengths. So it's not necessarily all of them are setting the most meetings. So like you might have like your best prospecting pairing, right? You might have your best outbound pairing. Like these are the pairings that are setting the most meetings, but what about the ones that are the best converting and have the highest execution rate on these meetings occurring, right? Like the highest conversion rate going into pipeline. Which pairings are generating the most pipeline? So once you define who these pairings are, you need to have, we like to set up essentially like 1 to 2, like 1 hour long interview sessions where we go deep, real deep. And what you find, and I talk about this with A players, but it's true also with an SDR AE pairing that's working really well. You've got to come prepared with like 20, 30 questions. And then there's going to be a lot more because there's a lot that they're doing that they don't realize is unique. They don't realize that no one else is doing what they're doing. So they might not, if you just go and ask them, hey, what are you doing that's so great? They're not necessarily going to give you what you need to know. So some of the questions that I like to ask is like, first and foremost, how many one-on-ones do they have scheduled per week, right? What does the agenda look like for each one-on-one? What do they cover together on these calls, right? What are they tracking and discussing daily and weekly? How do they decide what's working and what they should double down on versus what's not and whether they should stop or tweak something? And then another one is, how often are they talking outside of their one-on-ones? Because this really should be a daily communication between these two. And we'll talk more about that. But, what are their expectations of each other for these one-on-ones, for the day-to-day in the role? What is their process for defining what accounts they'll focus on, who they'll target, how, and with what messaging? That's a big loaded question that has like 10 to 20 subsets underneath of it, right? Like, what are their favorite methods for co-prospecting accounts together? Are they multi-threading accounts together? Oh, they are? Perfect. How? Exactly how? What are they doing? Each person, what is their process, right? So do they schedule pre-calls, like prep calls before every discovery call? And if they do, how are they running those? And who's coming prepared with what? And then do they have post calls after each discovery call? If so, right, how are they running those? There's a lot more, but I think those are some of the ones we like to start with to get the conversation going. And I like to have these calls with probably one of my SDR managers and definitely someone from enablement. And I need the enablement person to document everything, record the session. So I think that's step one is define who these best pairings are, study them, interview them, and now you start to document it. Right now you can start to put together something that you can leverage at scale. And so we went through this process at the end of last year, and we did probably close to 10 different interviews. 3 or 4 of them were really in depth, and we had to do like 2 to 3 parts. And we ended up creating this one pager, this SDR AE relationship framework one pager. It was really designed for new AEs, for all existing AEs, and then all new AEs coming on board. We wanted them to have this one page go to on like, hey, here's how it should work. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you should come prepared with. Here's what the SDR comes prepared with. And then there's like a bunch of cool hyperlinks where like our SDR managers helped put this together. And there's hyperlinks that can take them to like a Loom video where it shows them exactly how to do, right? Like what we're showing them to do. So it's condensed in one page, but then it has a lot of supporting context and detail behind, which is really important. Right. So I think, after we created that one pager, then we started leveraging it for all of our new onboarding sessions, for all AEs, for all SDRs. We even did some big company all hands enablement calls, and I think the key with that also is making sure it's like a very minimal slide deck, especially when you know who your audience is. If it's AEs, like you need to keep this to really just a few slides. Like we have like, I think 4 slides that we leverage on this deck, and it's designed to be very open forum, collaborative. And then after we rolled that out, we even took it a step further and started meeting with every sales leader. We would jump on their team meeting and drill it in like another layer to make sure it was very understood and people started actioning against it. And so then we could start to measure the success that was happening across the board.
It's that so helped clarify it for me, because I had a slightly different idea of what that diagnostic process looked like, and I mean that's it's kind of a heavy lift up front. But my follow up question was going to be about scale, but I think eventually you said you got it down. All right, here's best practice by one page, and that's how you scale it, right? Is that what I heard?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And the other thing we started doing was once we got it condensed to that one page, we even took some of those best pairings and we had them lead the enablement.
Yeah.
Because look, we all, as sellers, sales folks, a lot of us, unfortunately, are not paying nearly as much attention to enablement as enablement would like us to. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But if enablement's doing a really good job at defining what good looks like, and then we have the best of the best teaching the rest, that's going to create buy-in for me. That's going to create buy-in from the rest of the folks. That's going to create a little bit of FOMO. And that's how we start to see people take action on these and actually apply it versus, attend one training, be present for about 40% of the time, and then it's just gone the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's so you're doing such a great job of like leading into my next question, because that's what struck me too. This kind of bottom up build best practice, and the adoption then and the check in to it, as opposed to coming top down. Go, here's best practice. You guys live with it. I love the idea of building it together, and then also you said the enablement piece, that they're enabling one another on the new process.
Yeah.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
that's that's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
And so, how do you now? I'm sure. So you're bringing a lot of rigor to this, which makes total sense. And then there's certain flexibility accounting for styles, right? You and I as a pairing have a certain relationship style. How do you handle that kind of range of, hey, but Justin and Brian want to do it a little bit differently.
Well, that's actually a really good point. So the framework itself is designed to be where people can take it and make it their own a bit.
Okay.
So we do have the supporting context and detail where, there's going to be plenty of AEs that don't have a lot of experience managing that relationship, or they might not have good experience. So they do want to follow something to a T. We have that for you. But it's also designed in a way to where once you and your SDR or once you and your AE start to get on the same page, you guys start to develop that rhythm. You guys start to find things that just work better for you than what's even listed on this. And we've had a ton of folks do that, right? Like we've had some SDRs and AEs take like the co-prospecting motion to a whole new level where they're doing, daily, weekly call blitzes together on the phone together. Um, and that's had a ton of success too, where we haven't really seen other folks doing that. We haven't seen AEs willing to do that. So now we're trying to get those call recordings documented and pushed out to the rest of the folks so that they can realize like, hey, this actually isn't that big of a lift. And here's like what the expected ROI could be if you put in this level of effort.
Yeah. So so there's the diagnostic and that lift up front, and then how often are you visiting and tweaking? Is there a formal mechanism to say, all right, we have this one pager? How often are you checking in and going, let's adjust a little?
So I think it starts with, definitely at least every week, there is a very unique instance, example, or story that is occurring, and we have to document it. We have to be looking for it. We got to keep our eyes and our ears out for it, and we have to document it. So, like, I can tell you here at Talkdesk, like, there's a bunch of different Slack channels. If I'm looking at like the US or the Americas SDR Slack channel, that team is really collaborative and they're posting a lot of unique things that they're doing with their AEs. And I try my best to be looking at it daily. And if I see something that's unique that we don't have documented, I'll tag our SDR enablement person, Jennifer, and be like, hey, Jennifer, help me document this fast. This is incredible.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big key is like start with making sure we're not losing any of the greatness that's happening outside of what's already been defined and documented. And then, as we start to see things occur that we do think are unique, and we challenge a few of our A players or our team leads to try to implement this themselves, if that starts to go successfully, okay, now let's add to the one pager.
Yeah.
Like, let's tweak it a little bit. Let's change our message to onboarding. We need to include this.
So I wonder if the 80-20 rule applies here. Like, can you point to maybe two or three things that you did in documenting this process that you feel had the biggest impact? Like if we were to say to others, low hanging fruit, what should we go after?
I would say it was the extent and the level of detail that we were going in the interview process with
Okay.
a few of the best pairings where like we had one good call and we had enough to build something off of. But I was talking with the enablement person. I'm like, man, we can and we probably should go deeper. Like I
Right.
know we're going to be requesting another hour of their time, but like we got to also help them see like, hey, we're going to help you build your brand with this. If you guys want, we'll set up an enablement session. This is going to build your brand, build your network within the company, and this is going to like really help your peers exponentially. And so I think when we scheduled like parts 2 and 3 and even 4 for one of these pairings, we started uncovering some level of detail I had no idea that was occurring within my org.
Yeah.
I didn't know the extent of what was happening until we scheduled the second, third, and fourth.
Yeah, that and what were the sort of lead things that are producing the best results for you, to say, look, if there's two or three things you've got to do. Like we have that whole one pager. There's two or three things that have to happen to make this uber successful. Because I'm just wondering if like other people might be missing these, these big two or three things when you get into that hour-long deep dive. What are you finding to go, oh, this is it. This is the thing they're doing that's really making it successful.
Yeah, I can give you an example for one of them. We have, she was actually our SDR of the year, and she's paired with an AE who was a previous SDR manager, funny enough. So no surprise, they're one of the best pairings. And they had one of the biggest outbound success stories of the year in our previous fiscal year. It was a massive credit union deal, pure outbound that closed. And so we wanted to feature this on our RKO. And we wanted to set up that session. So we started scheduling these interviews and going deep. And the first interview, it got back to like what I said, where we got some of that information where it's like, okay, this is pretty cool what they're doing. I still can't tell what's unique. So then we went a layer or two deeper, where we had to almost do separate interviews with them so that we could understand their full process. Wow. And then it was that extent where we realized how much time these two were spending on their list building process, like probably hours more. It was a much greater priority and focus for them than really the rest of our org. How much time they were building, creating the list, scrubbing the list, ensuring like accurate contact information, ensuring that there was like pieces of research information about each individual on the list. I think that was a big one. The other one was we knew how often they said they were referencing each other in emails and phone calls. We didn't realize it until we basically said, hey, send us all your emails. So we basically collected all their chains for this one deal. And it was true, like right from the very beginning, every email that the AE was sending, he was kind of taking the high approach. So he was above the line, like VP and up. He was copying his SDR, Madison. And Madison, for every outbound email she was sending, she was copying her email. And then the two of them would follow up on each other's emails every 2 or 3 days. They were doing the same thing through LinkedIn. They were having these co-prospecting sessions over the phone where they'd jump on a Zoom together, and they'd be making dials together live. And if Madison got a hold of someone and she needed the help, Johnny would just jump in. And they did it in a way where it wasn't super awkward, because as you can expect, that could be pretty awkward.
Yeah.
But they made it work. So that was a couple of the other pieces. But then some of the more like commonalities was like, okay, these two are talking every day, 2 to 3 times a day. They've got 2 meetings scheduled per week, where, the first meeting is a lot more on, it's like, it's the planning. And the other meeting is on Friday, which is more the co-prospecting. So the first meeting of the week is really like account delivery and planning. The AE is bringing, 5 to 10 accounts that they want to focus on, contacts that they've identified within the accounts, context about the accounts and of these contacts, why they want to target these contacts. And the second meeting of the week, which we always say is optional, but some folks do run with it, that's where they're kind of reviewing progress, right? They're sharing their successes and learnings. They're mapping out accounts together. They're building the list together. But then they're also doing some of that co-prospecting together as well.
Yeah, it's something that comes to mind. I remember reading this about account planning a while back. It's the dull and determined effort that drives brilliant results, right? And that's
So well said.
this it's a lot of work, but yeah, that's where the magic comes from, right? It's the magic comes from the detail. Let's talk a little bit about success metrics, like leading and lagging indicators. What have you seen move in both the sense of leading and lagging as you improve this process?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one thing that we've built out and we're continuing to refine is I don't want to just have like a set of like dashboards and data that I can measure each relationship with, each pairing with. I want them to have their own individual dashboards that they can be looking at their data together, where they're tracking and measuring, refining and improving. So some of the stuff that we have them measuring and that we're trying to also create is, right, like contacts added to a sequence per day, per week, number of accounts engaged. You're right. Number of sequence steps that are skipped, number of overdue steps, email open rate, obviously, reply rate, relative reply rate, sequence bounce rate, sequence success rate, right? Like meetings booked based on the number of prospects in that sequence. What is their call connect rate? What is their, how many conversations are they having? What is their meeting book rate? What is their show rate? Right? When they're scheduling meetings, how many of these meetings are occurring? Of the meetings occurring, what is the conversion rate as to like what's going into pipeline? We're trying to measure that one really close right now. Obviously, pipeline generated month over month, quarter over quarter, pipe coverage, and then also making sure we're being very transparent about the daily, weekly activities from the SDR, mainly non-automated touches. That's what I want us to focus on. Like, okay, yeah, like you sent 600 emails last week. Cool. What about the non-automated touches, right? The phone calls, the social touches, some more like relevant, personalized messages that they had sent out. Yeah, I would say that's a lot of what some of that we're tracking today in a good way, some of it in a very manual way. Others we're still trying to build.
Yeah.
But that's the ideal state, everything I just listed out.
So is there, it sounds like you built this all based on internal best practices, right? I'm just wondering if there are any external guides or anything you leaned on to help you think through this, or did you guys build this all internally based on what the best pairings are doing?
It was, I would say, probably like an 80-20,
Okay.
right? So like 80% of it was what we documented internally. Now,
Yeah.
if we didn't have a lot to go off of, then yeah. I mean, because I have a fair amount of experience with this. So there was my own thoughts and ideas I brought to the table. The SDR leadership team that I worked on with this, they had their thoughts and ideas. And we also, we worked really closely with the AE leadership team on this, where we wanted to basically show them all the different styles of relationships that are happening, how disparate it truly was. And then what would happen if we really modeled and followed what the best do. So we created buy-in really fast with the AE leaders. And then we worked with them hand in hand. Every iteration, every new bullet that was added, we're asking for their feedback. Some were just like, guys, this looks great, great, great. Not a whole lot of feedback. Others were a lot more involved in what they were sharing, what they liked, what they didn't like. And that was cool because once we got to the final product, everyone was bought in. So then when it was time to roll it out, the AE leaders, since they had a piece of buy-in, they were pushing that a little bit more urgently and prioritizing it with their team versus something that maybe they had no idea how it was created or why they weren't, reached out to about it.
Yep. So one of my final question for you has to do with goal setting and comp. And speaking of leading and lagging indicators, how did either or both of those play a role in what determines best practice?
Yeah, it does. And it's funny because I told you earlier that in every one of those onboarding sessions we lead for like new AEs, the first slide that I lead these sessions.
Okay.
So the AEs have their onboarding session. I don't know how long it is. It goes for a couple weeks, but there is we have this SDR AE relationship session that I'm leading. And the first slide that I show is how your SDR gets paid. I want it to be crystal clear how their SDR gets paid, how they're incentivized, how they can move the needle, and how you can move the needle with them. So I think that's first and foremost is making sure that's fully transparent. Secondly, with the SDRs right now, they're not tied to a revenue or a pipeline number yet. There's a lot of data we're doing right now where next year that'll probably look different. But right now, 100% of their plan is essentially creating sales stage one, semi-qualified opportunities. And the criteria of those opportunities is actually the second slide that I cover is what is an SS1 criteria, very black and white. There's three things we talk about. We cover it with the AEs. And then I also open it up to see, like, does anyone have pushback? Does anyone have any concerns with this? Like, I can share with you why we came to this model, where we came from, and how we came to this conclusion. So I think that's one. And then the other one is with the SDRs, and this starts with onboarding with them, is expectation setting as to, like, yes, you are comped on and you're paid on generating these qualified opportunities per month, but let's make it crystal clear. We're only as good as the pipeline we're building, people. And that is so that the company can take those deals and close them at a repeatable and a predictable rate and go grow the company. So keep that in mind, even though, like, I'm not measuring you on pipeline and I'm not measuring you, paying you on the conversion and what's going to pipe and what's closing. We are looking at it closely. And if you have a high turnover rate or drop off rate of what goes into pipe and then drops out, or you're setting a ton of meetings, but not a lot of them are going to SS1, and we start to dig in and it's like, we're tossing a little bit too much crap over the fence. We could do a bit more refining on our end as far as what we're bringing to the table. All that is thought about and looked into.
Amazing. The entire, and I mean that legit, like the entire process. I really appreciate your time, super generous with your time and your ideas. And, I find one of the things I love about doing this podcast is the kind of valuable contribution I think you just made to this handoff. And so many of you and your peers have been great with that. So thank you so much for all of this.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. This was fun. Yeah, it's a topic, like you said, that it's starting to be talked about a little bit more. Everyone knows it's an issue at most companies, or it needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear more people talking about it. I'd like to learn from my peers more about it, because there's that, I've heard people call it, but there's like that dead zone, the tweener zone of, like, when an opportunity is or when a meeting occurs, and, like, whether it goes to an opportunity or whether it doesn't, that's like a whole nother topic, is like, how are you tracking and measuring that? What kind of, like, what does that feedback loop look like? Yeah. I could nerd out on that one too.
Yeah. I think you just set a new bar for it, and I'm also glad you say that, because I want to start encouraging folks, like, when we push this video out, to start filling that comment section with saying, hey, this is what I learned. So thanks for reminding me on that. So I appreciate it so much. And thank you again for all of your time.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Brian.